Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Red Mist podcast, and welcome to a very different episode, I suppose. You guys know this is a Liverpool podcast, and we focus on that mainly, but occasionally we do get people from other countries, fans of different clubs, to talk about their passions. And today is one such episode where we bring in Alberto Brown from the USA to talk about the upcoming MLS Cup Final between Seattle Sounders and Columbus Crew, and just in general, just talk all things American soccer. Alberto, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm very excited for the game coming up soon. How about yourself?
I'm doing good as well. I'm excited for the game. As you probably expect, it's the last game of the season, pretty much. So yeah, I'm excited. So tell us a little bit about yourself. So where are you from? How did your interest in soccer come about? Did you play as a youngster, as a kid, or how did that come about?
Sure, yeah. So I'm from New York City originally. I'm from Brooklyn. My mom's from an island in the Caribbean called Dominica, and my dad was from Costa Rica. And obviously Central America is huge on soccer, and so is the Caribbean. So growing up in New York City, having people from all over the world, from all different cultures, everywhere. We were just exposed to so many global things. One of those things was soccer. So it was always on in my dad's office, in the restaurants he went to. It was always on somewhere in my house. Either my uncles were watching it or my dad was. And then I basically was playing soccer as a goalie and a defender from, I think, maybe third grade elementary school all the way up into college through a couple of club teams.
Oh, yeah. That's good. That's good. Sounds like, did you ever think you could potentially go professional with it?
With soccer, not so much. I was more focused on snowboarding and skateboarding, but soccer was always a close second, third.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't know how to snowboard or skateboard either. So yeah. Yeah, but that's really interesting though. And are you a fan of any of the clubs in the MLS or any team outside of the US as well?
So in MLS, I'm currently in Atlanta, so I'm a big Atlanta United fan. They're one of the craziest fan bases that I've seen. I'm also a fan of the New York Red Bulls because, again, like I said, I'm from New York. And when the Red Bulls just got their brand new stadium and Thierry Henry had just joined the team and things were getting crazy, I was living in New York at the time, and it was just super fun to see the city fall in love with this team, like they have with the Yankees and the Giants and the Jets and all the other teams that are down there, and just the whole city come up and just be behind these scrappy team that was in this sport that was unfamiliar to them.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because Atlanta United was, I guess, the first team that really made me get into the MLS, and it was purely because of just how crazy the fan base was, and even I at the time I was living in India, and it resonated across across the world pretty much, because anyone who had a vague idea of the MLS, this new team, this upstart team, and then they just embraced Atlanta United, like I said, and like you said, and I think that was great for the sport.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because it was like one of the first times that I think we had an American team play on what would have been considered like a global level, like not quite Premier League, but maybe just below Premier League at times, but like. Yeah, that 2018 team was phenomenal to watch. It was so much fun.
It was, and one of their players obviously is in the Premier League now with Newcastle United, Miguel Almiron. Right, let's get to Saturday. Let's get to the MLS Cup Final, Seattle against Columbus. Just your initial thoughts on how the two teams got there and how they've been playing this whole season.
Yeah, definitely. So I think Columbus has been doing pretty well. I'm a little heartbroken. They did beat Atlanta a few times this year, which I'll let that slide. But Columbus played hard. Their defense does a pretty decent job. I think the conference final they were in, that one was kind of a bit of luck. I'm not sure if New England didn't play a better game, as they just didn't. They hit the crossbar so many times. They had so many just slight, like an inch or two off chances they could have had. But the other side of that, you have Seattle, and with Rui Diaz and that team, they're come from behind victory. They were down 0-2 at the half. They came back 1-2 real fast. They had tied it up before stoppage time, and then with less than 90 seconds left, they won the game out of nowhere. Like, that was such a phenomenal game. And that's how they played the entire season. And I think, for me personally, I think Seattle's going to win. just because they've got the better attacking side. They're just better at getting in, and they're just better at being present on the ball and making the most of those quick turns, which is what it's all about in MLS, really.
It is. And, this is obviously Seattle's, it's not Seattle's first rodeo into the MLS Cup. It's their fourth time in the last 5 years. I mean, you mentioned Raul Ruidiaz. He's been phenomenal in the postseason. I mean, I don't know. You mentioned the win against Minnesota in the conference finals. That was, I think, objectively, that was, I think, one of the best games of soccer that I've seen, not just in the MLS, just, in general. I thought Seattle played very well, and it would have been kind of harsh if Minnesota did go through, I thought. You think Seattle's going to win the MLS Cup. Do you think that, Columbus, obviously, they've come through because of their defense mostly. And do you think, do you think there's any chance, because Seattle's offense is really good, and do you think there's any chance that Columbus has, especially considering they're the ones playing at home this time?
That's a age-old question. An unstoppable force and an immovable object. I feel like their defense is going to put up a good fight, but I think Seattle can always find those creases and find those lines. And that's how they pulled out that win against Minnesota in the finals.
I don't know. My personal preference is to see Seattle win because it's a nice story to have the comeback and then go on to win the MLS Cup. Do you think Seattle's in the conversation for one of the great MLS dynasties? You had DC United early on, LA Galaxy, and do you think Seattle's up there now?
Oh yeah, most definitely. I think, like you said, they've won multiple times in the most recent years, and I remember when they won last year, it was not a foregone conclusion, but once the dust had settled and everyone who knew was kind of in the semifinals and the quarterfinals, it was Seattle. Everyone kind of knew Seattle was going to be the team. So I think, they're probably going to go down in history as being one of the stretches of this team's history where they're just a juggernaut. Yeah.
And it's very difficult to do that in the American sports system. We always talk about, if we talk about the NBA, we talk about San Antonio. And if they have these, because of the way the American system is set up, and we'll get to that in a little bit as well. It doesn't, it's not like the Premier League where you can have, or it's not like the German Bundesliga where you can have Bayern Munich winning for 9 years in a row. It's just because of the salary cap and because of various other factors, because of how much parity there is in the MLS. It's hard for teams to maintain that level of success over a consistent period of time. And for me, I think that's what makes Seattle a very, very good team. For those of you who are listening, some of you may not know this, but America has this different system called the playoffs, which takes the top certain amount of teams in the West and the East and pits them together in sort of a knockout competition. Do you think the playoff system is good for the game in America at this point?
If they could decide on a single playoff system, possibly. Like we were saying, in 2018, they were doing a different playoff system where it was, I believe it was 2 home games, 2 away games, 1 home game, 1 away game. You played back to back. If you won both of those, you moved on to the semifinals. You go from there. The next year, they did a completely different single elimination knockout round. This year, they're doing something totally different because of, COVID-19 and all that kind of stuff. I do think the playoffs kind of help, but I just think that they need to figure out, maybe worry less about ratings and trying to get more people to watch. Like, they're trying to chase the numbers that you might see in the Europe and around the world. But if you just go for a format that's better for the game, I think by making it more fun for the players and more interesting for people to watch, I think they will attract more people and it'd be a better idea.
So do you not think the change was, so before obviously you mentioned they used to play 1 home, 1 away, and now it's sort of like an NFL kind of system where it's just a single game and, you go through or you're out. Do you think that didn't attract people, especially considering in a normal season, obviously this season's different, but in a normal season, the playoffs would be between the October international break and the November international break. So it's just 1 month and just playoffs. Do you not think that's attracted people?
I think it did. I just think that the single elimination just kind of breaks people's hearts too often. And it is entertaining to watch. But at the same time, there's been so many good games. Like, imagine if that Seattle conference final, for example, was in the current format where you had to play 2 games, there might be a whole other second chapter to this game that might make this more enthralling. Yeah, they came back from behind this time, but the following match to decide whether or not they actually do advance, or by how far they advance, would, to help make a more compelling story and game, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. For me, what I used to like about the old sort of playoff system was the fact that, Caleb Porter, obviously he's coaching in Columbus right now, but when he was with Portland, he had this different strategy that he used to play away from home, and then a completely different one when Portland was back in Portland. So yeah, I think that element sort of gone. But I do understand a little bit as to why it's moved on to a single elimination system as well.
My only thing real quick is that with Portland, they're a whole separate entity. I lived in that city for a few months, and I've never seen anywhere in the world bleed for their teams like that city. The entire place shuts down at 2 p.m. Everyone's in their gear. The whole town's out. Every screen everywhere is playing that match, and it's just surreal to see.
Yeah, I think the Timbers have a real sort of connection with the fans that maybe not a lot of places have, and I'm not just saying in the US, even in other countries, maybe not a lot of teams have with their cities, I guess.
Sure.
And that's the same thing with the Trailblazers as well in the NBA. I think it's just the fact that they don't have too many pro sports teams. I think that's really helped establish the Timbers as one of the dominant sort of entities in Portland culture.
True.
How much of a growth has the popularity of European leagues seen over the years? Because you look at NBC telecasts these days. They've got a whole bunch of stuff going. They've got fan zones, and they've got my PL mornings, which is a hashtag that they run on Premier League days. How much has the popularity of European leagues, be it the Premier League or the other leagues like La Liga or Bundesliga, how much has that contributed to increasing interest from Americans into soccer?
So I think it's been kind of it's a chicken or the egg. I think because some of the players who were getting near retirement or decided to maybe try something different, come over for MLS for a couple of years, like Thierry Henry, David Beckham. There's so many others. Some having that international talent come to the U.S. and play in some of these quote unquote little league games, like people used to call them, brought some attention, saying, if their top players are coming here to play, that must mean there's at least some kind of competition going on. But at the same time, because you could attract those players, because you had the homegrown talent that was coming up to do that kind of thing. So I feel like the drive for Americans wanting more and more soccer may have started over from the Premier League that kind of fed into MLS, but as MLS kind of rose from being not quite on the same stage, like you said, Bundesliga or the Premier League or even La Liga, that now that they understand the game of soccer, they understand the pacing, they're more used to it. It's not so much, football or hockey where there's commercial breaks every few seconds. This is a patient game you have to watch. I think now that they're more used to the format and they understand it better, now that they know that there's even higher quality teams playing out there, I think they're starting to really make people latch on. Hopefully this time it actually does take off in the US.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the arrival of players like Beckham and Thierry Henry, especially Beckham, because I think it's just Beckham being the cultural sort of icon that he is, or he was during his playing days. I think the fact that he's gone to the US, he's gone to the Galaxy, and he's played a couple of years there, and it's not just I'm retiring and I just want to while away time in the US. It's not. He didn't come with that sort of an attitude. He led them to MLS Cups, and he genuinely just had an interest in improving American soccer. I think that's contributed a lot, in my opinion. And a few people that I've spoken to, they've also said that there's been an inherent interest in the game, because this is it's not just dependent on Beckham arriving. They feel like the fact that soccer is the most popular game in the world, and the fact that the US women's team is doing so well, has naturally sort of led into the growth of I guess attention that the game receives in America from Americans. It's hard for soccer. Yeah.
The women's team has won so often, and I think that's one of the major things. That's also, again, that's been Because in America, again, I played as a child, but every child plays soccer growing up. And I think that's kind of that weird stigma of, oh, yeah, this is just a kid's game. And yeah, they play it on the rest of the world where they use meters and drive on the wrong side of the world, yada, yada, yada. But like you said, having that talent come over and change that mentality from, oh, these guys are just running out the clock to, no, these guys are actually coming to compete because there's a game here. And then also seeing the legacy and the absolute domination of the U.S. women's team in the World Cup also, again, definitely fuel on the fire.
So another thing that's very unique, I guess, to America, and maybe not unique, I mean, Australia's got it as well. But the fact is that, other countries like England, for example, they have a promotion relegation system. And this is kind of an age-old debate, I guess, in the US, which obviously resurfaced when the Americans couldn't qualify for the 2018 World Cup. Should the US have promotion relegation with as part of their system now? Because when the MLS was established about 25 years ago, at that point, it would have been financially unstable to have a promotion relegation system. But right now, with the league being very stable, getting in it more than its fair share of profits, do you think it's time the US looked at promotion relegation, especially considering there are lower leagues like the USL?
I don't know. I think that they're getting toward that tipping point where I think it has been stable for a while. There's been a few expansions because there are some, entrenched fan bases. I think with the USL and the other leagues that they have, I don't know if we're quite to that size yet, because I've watched some of the games in the USL and even the top teams from the USL. I don't know if they would be able to compete at, again, like this Seattle's level on a regular basis. But again, there is a lot of transfer of talent from USL up to MLS if they do play up to that. Because I believe some of the youth players come from there as well. And I think some other stars on some teams have also come out of the USL.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think a lot of these youth affiliates for clubs, they do play in the USL and leagues below that. So for me, look, obviously, I don't have an in-depth knowledge of why promotion relegation is not a part of US soccer right now. But what I would say is, if they did want to establish that, they could, because, you look at leagues like Spain, the youth side often plays a couple of divisions below the main senior team. And, the only thing I would say is the financial implications of it. I think a team getting relegated would they be able to sustain the fan base? Would they be able to? I think those are still questions that I think the US is dealing with. And I honestly, I don't have an answer to this. But, I just wanted to know I just wanted to know what your thoughts were. Promotion relegation, and the same thing with playoffs as well, in a way, because it's a system that's very unique to the US, and it's part of American sports. You look at the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, everybody has playoffs. And, one thing that Zlatan said was, it's very hard to motivate a group of players when they know that they can finish 5th and 6th and still go on to win the whole thing. And do you think that's a valid concern to have? And do you think the playoffs, maybe it's time now the US started to have a look at maybe just a regular season and that's it, like whoever finishes on top finishes on top?
I mean, honestly, I would prefer that. I get the whole reason for the playoffs, and it's the whole the culture of the story and the drama and the hero and the underdog. I get why they have it, but I think it would just be best to leave it just a straight merit. Whoever scored the most goals at the end of the season, they get to move on.
Yeah, that makes sense. For me, I think I think the playoffs are a very unique American tradition, obviously, and it might be hard, I guess, for some. I mean, obviously, with the exposure to the Premier League and other leagues, people are familiar. Maybe 20 years ago, they weren't familiar with the idea of with the idea that a team on top at the end of the regular season can just be declared champions. But now, with the advent of all these European leagues, I think they're familiar with the concept, and I think people will be more willing to accept it. But on the flip side, like you said, the drama, the obviously the excitement, and games like Seattle, Minnesota, if they happen in the regular season, maybe don't carry as much weight and as much impact as they do as they do right now when they happen in the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah,
So
I think this kind of goes
that's
back to what you're saying about Zlatan, was that it's that mindset and that culture difference between the American players where I think they're okay with, like you said, they can just kind of finish where they finish, move on, do it better next season. But I think if they just had that urgency in the back of their mind, knowing that they had to play. There wasn't a whole, if there was less strategy of, if we win these 3 games and we can lose this one, we still wind up with enough points to make it to the semifinals or the playoffs, and then we can really put our hearts into it. I think it'd just be more advantageous to say, all right, no, we have to change the way we think about this game, change the culture, and just say, no, we're going to play this all the way through. Like Tang, you said, just get rid of the playoffs and just have it be more about actual soccer and skill.
Yeah. The other side of this, another thing that's very unique to American sports is the draft. And by extension, obviously, the NCAA system as well. So we've seen it work very well in other leagues. We've seen it work very well in the NBA, for example. Players go through college, come out after a year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, and then they get drafted into the NBA if they're good enough. And that system is obviously there for the MLS as well. The MLS has its own super draft for players coming out of college. Do you think the NCAA soccer, is it still relevant especially with youth academies starting to play a major role? A couple of years back, Real Salt Lake, their head coach basically traded away all their picks in the draft because they said, we've got all our youngsters through, our youth academy, so we don't actually need a draft. So is that something? Is the NCAA soccer still relevant? Is my question.
I think so. I think for the next couple of years, yes. If you ask me this question again in 5 years, that'd be much harder to answer. Because again, like you said, some teams, if they do have the financial backing to be able to invest in a solid youth program and make sure they have a constant feed of talent, they have people scouting and doing all that work to give them the talent that they want to build those players, that's awesome. But if you're a brand new expansion team like the one in Tennessee that just happened, those guys don't have that kind of money. They may have a small youth league. They may have a few players. They may be more of, we need our draft picks. We need to get these people out of college. Plus, I think it's also good just for the diversity of players, just having people come from different backgrounds, because maybe you have a guy who used to play, D1 lacrosse, who's super fast, who can break. He's got very good skills. He's got good field vision, but he decides that maybe he wants to try soccer, and he happens to be, the next Pele. He just never played.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point because obviously you have multi-sport athletes in college, and I think that's a very good point. And we've seen some good talent come out of college as well. I think Jordan Morris in Seattle came out of Stanford. So it's that age-old question. And the other thing with the NCAA system, one of the things that's been raised, especially in recent years, is the injury concerns that surround the scheduling, because obviously they play for a very short period of time in the calendar year. And, there's a lot of games just crammed in. People are playing maybe 2-3 games a week at that age. And there's been a lot of injury concerns with that. Do you think the college system needs a revamp?
That's what I was saying, that again, if you look about in 5 years from now, it may be less of a thing. Because I do think, the college system does compress the season too much to the point where it is detrimental to some of these players' health. And also just the way that the NCAA handles its athletes and everything. And that's a whole other mess in general. But like you said, they're trying to do too much in too short of a time frame, which I understand because they've got other sports going on. They've got their schedules, but at the same time, these guys are athletes and you can't just smash a season into something that short and expect no one to walk away unscathed.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got, obviously, moving on to sort of a different topic, we've got the US men's national team. We spoke a little bit about the women, and the women have been hugely successful. But the men, on the other hand, not so much. Failed to qualify for the World Cup in Russia, which was their first time in a long while, by the way, that they hadn't qualified. So, let me take you back to that time. What did you think was going wrong with the MNT at that point?
It's the same story that always happens with the men's team, is that we do have talent and we do have top level talent, but I don't know if they don't spend enough time together working as a team, or if the fact that they are in such varying level, they play in such varying levels of skilled on the various teams and clubs they play in that when they come together, there's just something that doesn't mesh. Does that make any sense? Because I've seen like on Toronto, you have Michael Bradley and Josie Altidore playing together, and they're in sync, they're moving, everything is fine. But I remember in 2016 when they were playing on that team together, there were just, these missed passes or this kind of like when you trade a new player to a team, they don't quite have that same familiarity. They don't read the body language. Just those little things don't connect. And when a lot of those little chains start to not connect, the whole game kind of falls apart. And then you wind up with the history you see in the U.S. often, where we almost qualify, we almost get there, and then we fall short.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, I guess that makes sense. But that's a problem that a lot of national teams have to deal with. And maybe do you think it was something to do with the coaching stuff at the time? At the time, it was Bruce Arenas. So do you think it was something to do with him and the way he approached the game? Because, even in his press conferences after he had been eliminated, it just seemed quite abrasive. It just didn't feel like he was taking responsibility for what had happened. And do you think maybe that sense, maybe they had this sense of entitlement that, okay, we're the US, we're one of the two best teams on paper, we should be going through easily. Do you think they had that sense of entitlement?
I think so. I think they did play part of it. I think they did go in with a bit of arrogance, thinking that, okay, this time we're 100%, we're going to make it. We're going to, show the world that we can do this. But it does also fall partially on the coaching staff for not being able to pull the team together and have a cohesive group working toward a common goal. But it's just one of those, it's a hard one to answer because there's just the players did sort of well, but they could have been better. The coaching staff, they did assemble what, like you said, on paper seemed to be a rock solid team, but it just didn't get put to the ground. And that kind of falls to what were they doing in training? What were what was the staff helping to make sure the team was gelling? Was the team actually gelling? Was it just a team that looked good stat wise, but there was just not enough there's just too much internal friction? Like, I don't know, there's so many questions around that one. It's hard to kind of nail down.
Yeah. It's a weird one because, you kind of expect the US to be there in the World Cup. And I've been watching the World Cup since 2002, and the US has always been there. Like, it's always a sort of a granted that US and Mexico are always going to be there from North America. Bruce Arena was replaced by Greg Berhalter after Columbus finished their season out that year. His first major tournament was obviously the Gold Cup, reached the finals, lost to Mexico. But do you think he's maximizing the talent that's available to him?
Not necessarily, because, for example, go back to Atlanta for a hot second. Michael Robinson, one of our defenders, is on the Nets national team. And I know that he was being partially utilized for some games, but the amount of talent that kid has is just mind blowing. Like, he saved our team so many times, but to not see him fully utilized, where he could be a much better central defender than what we have currently on the team on the regular starting roster. So I feel like they have the right chess pieces. I just don't know if it's just outside forces of coaches saying, hey, play this player, but don't play them too hard, or the players trying to, I want to play for the national team. That's really good, but I also do have, a conference final in a couple of weeks. So I'm kind of going to jostle a little bit. I may not give 100%. I may put all of it into it. I may not. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. International sort of games have always had that thing, where they could disrupt a season, a player's season because, of an injury or something like that. And I think that's a good.
Which team is most important? The national team, your club team, where do you put all your effort into?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think especially if you've got, the playoffs, you mentioned the conference finals. So I mean, it's something like that is, you maybe have one or two chances to get to the MLS Cup in your life, and unless you're playing for Seattle, apparently. But
true, very true.
Yeah, but generally you don't have that many chances, and you in the future you may get traded to a team that's competing more for draft picks than the MLS Cup, and you don't want to miss that chance to play in that sort of showpiece game. And yeah, I mean it makes a lot of sense. And again, you mentioned Michael Robinson and you mentioned, like, do you think there's always that age-old question of MLS players versus players abroad? Jurgen Klinsmann, obviously, he tended to favor players outside the MLS playing in Europe, whereas Bruce Arena maybe has been a little more friendly towards MLS players in terms of picking them for the national team. Do you think the US has found this sort of right balance where there are MLS players who are good enough to play for the national team at the same level like European players, or players based in Europe?
I think so. Yeah, I think we've gotten to the point now where we do have European level talent. But I do think that we were talking about earlier about Miguel Almiron. He's a prime example of, started in Central America, came to MLS, did really well in MLS, and then moved abroad. And I don't know if he would have had as much exposure and caught the world's eye had he not had the ability to shine like he did in MLS, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so I think
it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think having that bit of balance of having, again, being able to diversify is always the best of any world, honestly. So I think having that mixture of, we're starting to see more of, there is some homegrown talent that does play for, a third tier team in Europe and picks up some of those fundamentals, but then comes back to the US and learns that whole fast break, quick turnaround type of a game to make some more of a well-rounded player like Nagbe that we might see in the finals for Columbus, for example.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, like you said, the US has gone from being this, quote unquote graveyard of players where, players would go when they're 35, 36. I think, I always mention to sort of friends of mine, I say the US is sort of changing its appearance. The MLS is sort of changing its identity from being that graveyard league to being a go-between for players who want to come from South America, but go to Europe, but they don't know if they're good enough. Maybe if they go directly from Argentina to England, they may not be good enough to play for that team in England. But if they have a few years in New York or LA, they then become good enough to the point where teams in Europe can look at them and say, okay, this guy, he's definitely good enough to play in Europe. So I think it's changing its identity. And, the example that I always say, that I always use is the US is becoming the Ukraine of past, when people look at Ukraine and especially Shakhtar, they would always get talent from South America, and that would be sort of the proving ground. If you could do well in Ukraine, if you could do really well in Ukraine, you'd be good enough to play for teams in England and Spain, for example. So I think the US is becoming that.
I think another weird side effect of that is also that you've got some of these guys who, like Julian Gressel, I believe, was playing in the Bundesliga, or not Bundesliga, sorry, in I think their B level or their C level German league, and then moved over to the US and became, he was the top assister, I believe, for the league. And at one point he had 20 some odd goals and he was playing for us. He's doing a pretty good job now with DC. Like, again, he's one of those players where I don't know if he would have shown as much promise had he always been on a team that may have been relegated to a lower level. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. And Julian Gressel was, I think he was top or pretty much close there on the assist chart. How much, we mentioned obviously European football, how much of a boost is it having players now at top clubs? The other day, Weston McKennie and Serginho Dest, they played against each other in a Champions League game, which, maybe 20 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. But today you've got 11 Americans this year, which is a record, playing in the Champions League. And, obviously not just, sitting on the bench. You've got Christian Pulisic at Chelsea, Serginho Dest at Barca, Weston McKennie at Juventus. Do you think how much of a boost is that to the domestic game, to Major League Soccer?
Oh, huge.
Or is it a boost at all?
I think it's a huge boost because we did a friendly between Atlanta and Juventus 2 years ago. And Mercedes-Benz Stadium holds about 75,000 people at max capacity. And this is it's middle of summer. It's a Tuesday afternoon, and there's 68,000 people in the stadium to see their home team play Juventus. It's one of the top teams in the world. Everyone who knows anything about soccer knows those white and black stripes. And I think it's very good. I think it's just having those players be on that level and being able to attract these clubs and have some of these friendlies is, again, just like we were talking about before, it's just so good for little kids who are playing soccer now and just the entire American culture of soccer. Just like how baseball was sports in Japan, where, they would do away games that kind of show it, and the Japanese people became so enamored that they then adopted that sport, and now it's a huge part of their culture. It's started off very much the same way, where it was kind of a little here, a fledgling league that kind of had this groundswell, and then it became, the point where you've got players from Japan now coming to play on the Yankees as well. So I think it was only a matter of time until soccer got there, and we're just now at that bubble where it's starting to reach critical mass, where you might see an explosion of U.S. players start to go from here directly to other teams abroad.
Yeah, I think especially, the example of Weston McKennie, I think for me is because Christian Pulisic went quite early, but Weston McKennie is someone who sort of came through the ranks at Dallas with FC Dallas, and from then on he's gone on to play in Germany, and now he plays in Italy as well. So I think McKennie's example is, it's showing a pathway to youngsters that if you do well, you will get a chance in Europe and you will get to play for the likes of Juventus. Just a little bit of, just one little thought. What do you think about the whole pay-to-play system, which has obviously been a major criticism with the US? Because you look at academies in Europe, they don't follow that system. Like, you don't pay to play football. I think. Do you think in America that's an issue?
Yeah, that's an issue with many things, but I think it's very detrimental to the whole spirit of the game, because it's the world's game, because you just need, a couple of broomsticks, a ball, and a few dudes to go out and play a game. So having this whole pay to play and making a barrier to entry to the sport is just, no, that should not be a thing. And I hope to see it go sooner rather than later.
Do you think that's hiding a lot of talent or preventing them from maybe getting to the top? And this might seem like an obvious question with an obvious answer, but do you genuinely think that there are people who maybe don't see soccer as a viable career because of that, because they can't spend as much money? Because this is something that's been associated with motorsport. If you look at motorsport around the world, whether it's Formula One, NASCAR, you kind of need money, you kind of need backing to rise all the way to the top. And do you think that's the same problem that soccer has at this point?
Yeah, I think definitely in the US, that's definitely a problem, because you shouldn't, like you did say with Lewis Hamilton did very, very well because he has an amazing pit crew, and he happened to, look into being able to get one of the top cars out there. And again, if you have a kid who lives somewhere in the middle of nowhere in the US, and they're not exposed to, they don't have the exposure to these kinds of things, and those clubs aren't nearby, they may not go down that path. They may pick a different sport. They may just give up on sport altogether. So any barrier to entry is just going to be detrimental, because you never know who might just wander on one day and happen to be the next superstar.
Yeah. I think that's fair, because guys like Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi, who, whatever order you place them in, they're going to be 1 and 2 in terms of the greatest of all time. At least as far as this era is concerned.
Always Messi and then Ronaldo. I'm sorry if that offends anybody. It's just facts. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So like I was saying, it's always, guys like those, they start off on the streets, or they start off in their local parks. And I think, like I said, it's an obvious question with an obvious answer. If you, like you said, if there's a barrier to entry, there are people who are going to be denied entry. And, just one last thing on the MLS Cup. Seattle against Columbus playing at home, obviously, we mentioned a little bit. What's your prediction for the game?
My prediction is a 2-2 tie in stoppage, and in the last maybe 2 minutes or so, Seattle pulls ahead again.
That sounds like a typical. I feel like I've seen that movie somewhere recently.
Yes.
But it's a very typical Seattle thing to do, and I think for me the intriguing thing is Columbus. Obviously, the team's quite different from the one that made the MLS Cup a couple of years back when they lost to Portland. But now they do have a coach in Caleb Porter who knows how to win, who's kind of the playoffs are kind of his thing, and have been for a while, and but on the other side, you're facing this potential dynasty. So it's an interesting game. I personally went with a 2-1 win to Seattle. Mine wasn't as dramatic. I think I just sort of said, 60, 70 minutes. That's probably 3 goals in the game, 2-1, and that's pretty much it. Seattle wins from there.
It'd be interesting to see what happens in the first half, because if you watch the first half of the Columbus match, they were not necessarily pummeling New England, but they were definitely a little bit more on the front foot. So if they can come out in the first 30 minutes, get a solid goal and keep the pressure on, if they can get Seattle on the back foot, I know like to come back from behind and win, but if they can keep the pressure on Seattle for the first 30, then go into the half up 1 or 2 possibly, then maybe.
Yeah, I think for me, if Columbus gets a 2-goal lead, then it's going to be harder for Seattle, I think, because Seattle plays the full 90 minutes. And, like you said, exactly. Columbus has got to keep pressure throughout the 90 minutes. And, against New England, Columbus did start off well, but, the second half was not as good as the first, let's say. And, exactly. They can't afford to.
Minutes in.
Yeah, they can't afford to do that against Seattle, and because Seattle's going to be playing the full 90. And, I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a good final, I think. Raul Ruidiaz, and surprisingly for Columbus, Giassi Zardes, I think, this season, I did not see that coming from him. I think he's performed really well.
He was definitely one of those guys, yeah.
Yeah, it was just a very surprising... go on.
Yeah, that was the same sentiment. I knew he had some skill. He was pretty good, and he had some flashes here and there, but I just didn't expect this kind of season out of him at all. But kudos to him.
Yeah, kudos to him. And it's been a weird season. There was obviously the COVID pandemic, the MLS is back tournament, and then finally the regular season as well, followed by the playoffs. But here we are, final game of the season, Seattle against Columbus. Should be a good one. But thank you so much, Alberto, for joining me today. It's been amazing to talk to you. Just a lot of insight into American soccer, American culture, and just, the MLS as well.
Hey, great talking to you too, man.
But yeah, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you guys for the support on the podcast as well. We recently crossed 1K listeners, so that's an achievement. This was exciting. I'll see you guys for the Fulham game. I'll do a preview for the Fulham game. Liverpool against Fulham. We're traveling to Craven Cottage, second in the table, and hopefully we can keep that momentum up. But yeah, until then, take care, stay safe, stay well, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.